So I'm not really going to talk about this too much. We did it last time. I'm a Microsoft MVP. I have my book out. I sold out but the last talk because I only had 2 anyway. But please go online and pick one up. It's good for any programmer. This is actually the coding standards where I work, is my book. So it's the only pure .NET coding standards out there. Also, I'll have at the end of the class, I'll have my DVD I'm selling, brand new this year. It's packed full of all the sessions I did last year, a video of all the sessions I did last year, high-res video, and all the slide decks from last year and this year, demo projects from this year, last year, all my .NET interview questions, which I passed around last time. 40 pages of questions that I use to interview you guys when you come work at my company, if you come work at my company. Speaking of that, we are hiring, so if you want to leave this heat and come to sunny, nice San Diego, shoot me your resume, and I'll send it to the appropriate people. It also has a bunch of other cool things on it, too. So I'll be selling those for 15 after the session. I'll also take some over to the dinner after Code Camp if you guys want to buy them there. So today, not a lot of topics. We're basically going to do an overview, basically of how I use these, well, what the problem space was, why I needed to use these brand new technologies from Microsoft, how I went about the design, and then a summary, which just sums up, not only sums up everything, but kind of goes over what we still have ahead of us. You know, because we're about to release version 1 any day now of what I'm about to tell you about. So, of course, I already have much more stuff they want, you know, so. As usual, so overview. So here's our current problem we had since my product was released, where I work. So here's the problem with our program the way it is right now. Is all data is stored in our local data center. Not that this is a problem, but you're going to see why it's a problem. This version, we host everything in San Diego, which is actually not completely true anymore. We're actually moving it to co-locations because we don't want to have it in our building anymore. Customer partners do not have access to the data, as you can see up here. So with this version of the product, customers can't get to their own data, which kind of sucks for them, especially when they want to not only write their own programs, but do BI and things like that against it. They have no access to it right now. So this is why I've been working on this almost since version 1 was released, because this is a really big deal. And the other problem we have is in our product, there's no way to create, well, like any other company, right, is we never have enough developers and we never have enough time for everything that our customers want, right? It's impossible, right? So there's no way for anybody to actually write add-ins to our product at this point, right? So if somebody did have a great idea, or if a company who already had our product wanted to have something surface inside of our app, it just doesn't work right now. Not only because the capability is not there in our app, and number 2, they have no access to the data. So what are they going to show besides Gmail or something like that, right? It's not very extensible. Thank you. Is that what you said? Yeah, thank you. So as you can see, we have a lot of issues, and we needed to solve those. And also right now, there's no ability to upsell products in our application. Our application is very, very big, and when you buy it, you don't get everything. You have to, buy licenses for all these different features are in our app. But to do anything in our app, you basically have to call us and pay for it, and we'll turn it on. But the problem we have is that a lot of customers don't know what those capabilities are to call us and turn them on. So we have no way to upsell our own products in our own app at this point. So here's what we wanted. Here's what we're doing, which, like I said, is going to be released here pretty soon. First is you have immediate access to the network data for partners. So this partners can actually be Anybody from our own current customers to anybody else that wants to get to the data for some reason, right? So we need to give them access to this back-end data store, and we're going to do that. I mean, we are doing that. And then the other thing, these are kind of just opposites of what was on the last slide, is provide customers with the ever-growing wealth of tools for extending the application, right? So we need to have the ability for partners to provide. Right now it's only in web browser programs, but we need to have the ability for partners to provide these programs inside of our app. You know, we're basically ripping off parts of like the Apple iStore theme, right? You just go up there, you pick something, you buy it, and you have it, right? That's not going to work like that in the first version, but basically that's where we're shooting for. But the app will definitely show up. Just right now, you have to call in and set it up, and then it will be turned on, and you will automatically see it inside of our app. And these apps will actually be hosted on the partner location. So they'll not only be hosting their apps through the internet into our application, but they will be using the internet to go back and forth to get the data itself. Mostly read data and some write data now, but someday it'll be almost all write data. And of course, because we are using REST and what we learned about in the last class, this will work with any device, and we have an iPhone app coming out now too that uses the exact same things I'm going to be talking to you about. There's no difference. To us, a partner is a partner and an app is an app, right? We don't care what it is. It just accesses the data the same way or surfaces inside of our application the same way. But you can do, other types of apps like the iPhone and things like that. So someday in the future, our app, our main application will be we will be a partner to ourselves, and our main application will just be another app. And we're kind of using that a little bit right now, but in the future, everything will be going through what I'm going to show you guys today. But right now, that's not the reality. Marketing exposure, because now remember I told you upselling products. If people aren't licensed, part of what I wrote and made available, if people aren't licensed for a certain thing, it will actually show them that, in our product now. And when you click on it, it just doesn't go into La La Land. It actually shows them, a nice little marketing web page, from our back end. And then we're also going to handle all the billing for this app. So this app we're making money off of, right? Right now, it's basically, it's a monthly or yearly subscription if you want to be an app in our app store, essentially. Well, we're calling it the tool store because we're automotive, right? So we're calling it the tool store. So if you want to be an app in our tool store, you pay. Not only do you pay to be a developer, but you're going to pay, I think it's monthly or yearly or whatever. I'm not part of that really. But you pay for this access. You don't get it for free just because you're a customer. You pay for it. And I've already built in the capability, not that we're going to use it like that at first, but I've already built in the capability that we track all the calls and we track how much each partner is using, how much data is going through the service and everything. I've already wrote that part. But we're like I said, we're not using it for billing at this point, but we will in the future. So the goals, easy to access data anywhere, in Windows apps, web apps, iPhone apps, whatever. It's really up to the partner what they want to do. One of our biggest partners that actually were here this week, and they have a Silverlight app, that's really custom to their 250 repair shops to print, forms and all kinds of other stuff. So they've partnered with another company to retrofit that app to basically use this model I'm going to be teaching you guys about. So you can do Silverlight too. It's really up to you. What we host inside of our application right now is purely just web apps. Someday in the future we'll change to more Windows, WPF apps, but right now, because of time constraints, it's only web apps. And of course we track usage. I've already wrote this, and I've already wrote the part that tracks abuse too. People are really doing stupid things and bogging down our servers. And actually in October at the big trade show of the year in Vegas, this was the hit of the show, was what I'm about to show you. So it's definitely going forward. So we have 3 different types of applications that we've noted. The first is a visual application. It's basically an application that does services inside of our application and does not use our back-end database. I don't know what it could be. Gmail, showing their email inside of our program, or checking stock quotes. I don't know. I don't know really who's going to be writing what types of apps these are going to be, but they won't have anything to do with our data. And then there's what we call a data application, which doesn't even need a visual part. If they just want to get data out of our back end for some purposes like BI or KPIs or I don't know what, then they can register and they'll just be a data application. But most of the applications will be mostly the composite application. Of course, will have some visual UI inside of our program, and then also access to data as people are clicking around through our program. There's been a lot of, and still are a lot of really big challenges with this project, which is why I'm surprised I haven't lost more hair than I have. But as I alluded to in my last session, we have the worst database I've ever seen in my life. And Julie Lerman, who wrote the book on any framework, agrees with me. First off, we duplicate identity keys in every table, which just makes it really a lot more difficult, if you ask me, especially when you're joining and things like that. The other thing, and this is what every programmer gets burned on in our company, in my team, is that we have the same data up to 4 different places. So when you're given a feature, or most likely if you're new to our team, you're given bugs to fix. You go in and you fix it. You go, hey, well, the data's going here. I need to change this service store procedure and do this, and I'm all done, right? Then it goes to QA, and they say, well, it changed here, but it didn't change over here. So I've seen it up to 4 different places in our database, the same exact data, so which is horribly confusing to anybody. I've been there almost 3 years now, and I still don't get it. The other thing that really drives me crazy, which I've been able to solve with the new version of any framework, is that he stores multiple, completely different sets of information in the same table. Unrelated data in the same table, right? So I can keep going. But so confusing, same data, multiple tables. We need to allow secure access to the data. This is really, really important because we're dealing with, a centralized data. So an app can only access a select number of services, which I built into the security. So we have basically different lines of business to my project, which are basically just a huge set of services. So each line of business gets access to just certain services, and others don't have access to the other services. So that's some security that we had to build in. And the app can only get data for the customers that allow it to get data. See what I'm saying? We adopted an opt-in kind of approach, that just because an app can get to the database, it still can't get to any of the shops, any of the repair shops. The repair shop basically has to opt in and say, yes, I'm willing to share my data with you, right? And at any time in the future, we don't have this right now, but they'll be able to go into our app and say, I hate this freaking company, and unclick, and bam, that's it. They will have no more access to the data. So their own data. Shops, even though if you really think about it, we don't have any important data in our program. We're not a medical app or anything like that. There's no HIPAA compliance, or there's no credit cards even in our program, right? It's just a bunch of data about a repair on a car. Who gives a crap, But you would not believe how shops are so against sharing that data. Most of them are dead set against sharing their data with anybody. And it's not because they care that you're going to get somebody's information. They could probably care less about that, right? It's more the fact that they don't want anybody else to know what they're doing, right? And how many cars they're processing a day and how much money they're making and stuff like that. That's really what they're afraid about. It's not your data. They could care less, that somebody gets your address, So anyway. And also access data from multiple locations. So one of the things we had to build in was not only do currently in our data, in our back-end servers, we have multiple databases because we have, I don't even know how many thousands of shops now. Well, I just heard that I was in a board meeting the other day. We have, since we released this product, which has only been about a year and a half, we have I think we're up to 11,000 shops now. That's not programs a shop is using. One shop could have 5 of our programs, but we have about 11,000 shops. And so because of this thing I just told you about where shops don't like to give out their data, I've already built in the ability that they can host the data locally at their shop and not at ours. So we have about 300 shops that completely refuse to give us the data. And they mandate that it has to be on their servers. So I've already built in the ability the partners can get the data from no matter where it is located. Right? So how do I solve this? So the first thing, of course, which I just spent a lot of time complaining about, was the database design. We have hundreds of tables just in one database, and then I know we're still thinking about changing this number. I was talking to my boss this week, actually, but we're going to try to start limiting it to 5 shops per database. But we have thousands and thousands of databases now. And tables can have hundreds of columns. I think I said in my last talk, we have one table that I know is over 250 columns. Don't ask me why, but that's the way it is. And so you're going to see I can fix all this with any framework, luckily. Some data is stored in different tables. We kind of talked about how all the data is all mixed up. Multiple types of data stored in one table, talked about that. Primary keys duplicated almost every table. This has become, I've designed databases for a long time and I've never seen anything so bad. And so this really becomes an issue, especially when you want to implement a good model on top of a crappy database. It makes it difficult. But I've solved probably 95% of the issues using any framework. And too much expertise to understand the database. Except for one guy, none of us really understand the database. And it's really hard for me to understand the database because I have come from mostly good databases in my past. I've worked with some of the best DBAs I've ever seen. So I've even designed a whole database system with a DBA for a very large, popular web commerce e-commerce company. And but I've never seen anything so bad. So because I come from the good world, hopefully, it's really hard for me to wrap around my head. I'm sorry, it makes me a bad programmer, but it's really hard for me to wrap my head around shitty stuff, And that's definitely what we're stuck with, for some time. So the solution really that I've came up with Julie's help actually, was I designed basically a database model of how the data really should look. I created a good model, as good as I can. Like I said, it's about 95. I'm 95% happy with it. Getting rid of a lot of these duplications. If, let's say, for example, if vehicle information is stored in 4 different freaking tables, right? I basically come up with what I call the master table, which in this case is the vehicle table. Why you would store vehicle information in any table that then says the vehicle table is beyond me, but that's what happens. So anyway, for me, what I call the master table is the vehicle table, and that's the only one I expose, right? All these other ones that have data, I don't give a crap about, right? Except for inserting. And I can fix that with WCF Data Services, okay? But my model contains what I call the true data of where it really should reside. So it's really easy for any new programmer now to come in and understand, which is one of the important things I said in my last talk. about any framework in and of itself. Is creating good models that people can understand. So what Julie and I came up with really is how the only way we could solve this until we change out the underlying database, which I wish we could do today, but it's just not a reality in business, is we basically don't go after any table, right? We use only views for getting the data, okay? So this allows creating data structures that make more sense and easier to use. So if I create a view that really makes more sense getting that data from multiple tables, I can do that, and it's represented as one view, which is essentially turns into one entity. Okay, so I'm saying? The new version of any framework allows for splitting and combining data from tables. So remember when I said I have up to 4 completely different types of information in one table? Well, I can split those into multiple entities now with any framework 4. So it makes for, I can take that, like for instance, an owner, I can yank that out of the table and create a view of it and then do that in any framework and forget all the other data that's in there because it doesn't make sense for an owner. And allows renaming of columns that don't make sense. And more importantly, in the views, I just don't even show columns I could care less about, right? So there's no extra data that it's surfacing through the view and then through an entity, okay? So this is how I mainly solved the issue, was doing views. We had to abandon the tables. I will tell you that, especially the first version of any framework, newer version's better, but the new update that's coming out soon will be even better. Like most Microsoft products, and especially ones that rely on generators and wizards and things like that, it works really good if you have a really good database design. If I had a really good database design, I would be using views, right? But I don't. And of course, because of this, we're using store procedures to insert and update all the data. Right, just custom store procedures. The views and any framework allows us to make things easier for developers to understand and use. We separate the models by purpose. So one thing Julie and I came up with is we weren't going to show 200 entities or whatever or more in one model, right? It would just make it really hard to maintain. And so we've separated out the purpose of the data in different models and therefore different services. We use views with different models. We actually do this, especially for like our main repair order view which is basically the root of everything that deals with repair order. We reuse those views in different models and just cut off the fields that we don't need. Remove properties that don't make sense. And like I already alluded to, we only do inserts and updates through the main entity. Even if that data, property or field appears somewhere else, we mainly have only one entity you can actually update it with, right? To get rid of this duplicate data crap and confusion.
So where you're talking about reuse, you're talking about use the same view, but then at the entity level, you cut the properties you want.
Right. Right, exactly. And to make it mainly a lot better to go across the wire and also easier to add our own custom functionality, we're using POCO T4 templates. There's a POCO, and there's an entity framework POCO generator that you basically, when you go to your data model, you say generate views or something like that. It allows you to pick either POCO, the entity framework, or the self-tracking entities, and create T4 templates that generate all your data access code in your business entities. So we use POCO because it's the lightest weight, and there's no stuff in it to do change tracking and stuff like that. So it's a lot smaller data in and out of our services, and then it's a lot easier for other programming other programming languages to use because it's not bloated with Microsoft stuff. So that's the one we use. That's really the one to go across the wire. And I'm going to show you how, a little bit painstakingly, the problem with any framework is that it basically sticks your business entities and your data access in one assembly, right? And since I'm a big proponent of end-tier development and things like that, that just doesn't work for me, right? Especially for reusing and sharing and things like that. So I figured out a way, and I'll show you a couple little hoops I had to jump through to get this to work. But I separated out these T4 templates in different assemblies. So I basically have a business entity assembly and a data access assembly, just like you're supposed to do. Out of the box, any framework or Visual Studio really doesn't support that, but you can do it. I'm going to bring up my project. Here's my client project, here's my data project. So here I have my sales order. I fixed it up pretty much. Have my sales order detail. I have my one-to-many relationship. So here's my first model I'm going to show you, which is my sales order model in Entity Framework. And you can see the one relationship I have on it. So in views, you have to manually create the relationships. They won't come up because you can't do relationships with views in SQL Server. And here's the other model I have. This is the customer model. This is kind of showing how I'm separating out the different types of data into different models instead of putting everything in one. So here I have my customer address and my address. Now, to create the T4 templates, you go to Add Code Generation Item. That was the thing I couldn't remember a couple seconds ago. And pick one of the generators. In this case, because we're going across the wire, you really need to pick the ADO.NET POCO Entity Generator, which is an extension to Visual Studio. You just go up to the extension manager and load it into your Visual Studio, and it will appear. But you pick one for C# or one for VB, and all three of those will appear. And what that creates, the first one it creates is the customer model context .tt, this is the T4 template. I'm not really going to go over T4 templates, but this is the template that generator created for me for my customer model. Okay? So, and here's where you can see where it's pointing to the actual Entity Framework file. Right here, the input file is customermodel.edmx. So basically what we're doing is we're circumventing the code generation that any framework does out of the box with our own, which in this case is just using these T4 templates that Microsoft has provided. You can write your own or get other ones. It's really up to you, but I'm using the ones that Microsoft provide. So then I have my context file up here. I have to manually move the entity file down into my project called AdventureWork Entities. This is basically my business entity assembly. And I move this file from the data project into this one. And then I have to modify this line right here telling the T4 template where the EDMX file is, because when you move it manually, it now loses the ability to know where that EDMX file is. So I just have to modify that. And you just saw there in a second, the T4 templates creates all my entity type files there for me. Here's an example of my customer and all the overridable properties. Of course, this is a partial class, so you can extend it any way you want. And see, here's the files it creates automatically for you when you change your model. It creates these, at least in this case, it creates these 4 address, customer address, and customer model, which is kind of ties everything together. So these are your business entities, and you can see there's really nothing in them, right? That's the way it should be in proper separating out your concerns into different assemblies and tier development. And the cool thing with this now is I can share this with other .NET apps, and it's not tied to the data itself. Because this could be a .NET app on the client side that goes through a service to get the data. They don't need all that data access crud, right? So that's why I separated it out. So I can actually use, you can't use this with different languages, of course, but I can use it with any .NET language on the client side to use the same business entities and rules and things like that, either on the server or client side. So that's the main reason I separated these two out and go through some caveats like you saw in the T4 template. I'll show you another one that happens when you separate these out. You know, because like I said, by default, .NET doesn't like you doing that. But there's a way to get around it. So one of the cool things about the T4 templates is when inside the same project that contains the EDMX, that first context T4 template, if I do any change to my entity model and press save, it'll automatically regen those context files for the database access. Okay? The issue now is that I move the entity T4 template into a different assembly, right? And so therefore, it doesn't know when you're changing the DMX file because it's not in the same project. So that's another caveat. So you have to remember, unfortunately at this point, I'm working with them on this, but right now you have to remember that if you do change your model, you have to go to the business entity assembly. You right mouse click on the T4 template and say run code generator. And it will regen those files for you.
Is your suggestion to them for the fix to put a target location for those generated POCO classes in the EDMX?
I haven't talked specifically. I've just told them briefly so far. I just want that to work. I want the things to auto-generate for me. And there's one other thing about namespacing I'm working on them to change. So exposing the data to partners, of course, we're going to use services through HTTPS. That's at least publicly, that's the only way we expose our data at work. And we're using the WCF Data Services to expose it through REST, you know, like we saw in our last talk, through JSON and Atom Pub. It allows us to easily expose the models, one model per service. I already said that a few times. You can't combine the models into one service. But I like that because that's how we've separated it. You know, we can do security on a specific service, depending on what kind of partner and partner app they are. And we can control access using the entity set access rules, which I showed really briefly on my last one. So I think I show more now, where you can set different read and write accesses and things like that by entity manner. We are limiting the records returned, which I talked about in my last talk. So somebody doesn't bring down our database on us. So we are using the entity set page size to do that. When we move over to this other company I told you about before, Sanoa, we will take that off of our end and basically enable those the data limiting with Sanoa itself, because it's much more full-featured than any framework is. We prevent partners from accessing clients that do not have the application enabled. Essentially, I talked about that already. Clients have to opt in to share their data. So we do all those security checks. I do all the security checks in the back end. Modify data coming into the service using change interceptor. So this is one thing I'm going to show you in the demo that I didn't show in the last one, is that data coming in and out of WCF Data Service, you can actually do something to before it actually goes to the other, whatever underlying layer it's going to. So, for instance, remember I said I expose one main entity for like a vehicle, but there's other places I have to update that data, right? So I do that, on the WCF Data Services side, because when that vehicle data comes in, before it goes out down into the underlying querying providers, I then change those other tables as it's coming in. No developer ever has to worry about it ever again. I do that myself as part of my architecting. I'm going to show you quickly how I use WCF Data Services to do this. Of course, this is not, again, I'm using AdventureWorks, so it's definitely not the full-blown, I can't show you my stuff at work, of course, because of confidentiality stuff. But I basically mimicked it. Actually, I use this demo that you can get off my DVD to prototype everything I'm using in my real project at work. I prototyped everything in this demo. I'm going to add a WCF Data Service. Well, it's actually already there. I'm just going to show you how to do it. You do add item, add WCF Data Service, and then you name it. We'll create the WCF Data Service. We just saw that last time. And you can see here how I've set up any of the access right rules. So first off, here's my type I'm exposing. But of course, like I said before, I set everything to no access, which is the way you should do things in the real world. And then on entity by entity basis, then I give each entity whatever access I want to give it. In this case, I'm only doing read all, but I could say, read only or read write and things like that. The one other caveat I have to do to get this to work is this. I have to override the create data source, create my new context up here, and I have to point to one of the types in the assembly so all the magic happens correctly. Because I separated out those into different assemblies, that doesn't work anymore unless you do that. I'm also setting my page size to 50, so that means no matter what entity you get to, no matter what you ask for, you only get 50 records back at a time. And here's my intercept queries. Here I'm intercepting the data, and I'm basically saying, hey, don't send anything back unless it actually has sales order details. So you can see a really quick example there, how to use the change interceptors. And that's a query interceptor. This is a change interceptor. So when the data comes in, I can look at it and say, if it's an add or a change operation, I'm going to set the modified date to a UTC date, no matter what the client did, because they probably did it wrong. And I'm going to automatically do the subtotals. So here's I'm doing my subtotal, I'm doing my total due. And then I'm also have this demo thing here that if the ship date is further than today, then I'm going to send an email to the shipping department or something like that. So you can do those in the change interceptors. All you get is very, very extensible what you can do in the change interceptors to modify that data before it goes to the underlying layers. And if they want more than 50 records, like if they want to get all the repair orders that a shop did in one day, which most shops don't do over 50 anyway, that's kind of why we picked the number, all they have to do is paging, right? So if they show a normal query, they get 50 back. But at the very bottom of that query is a URL to the next 50, right? And they just have to keep going on that URL until they run out. But we're limiting it to 50 back at a time. So it's not impossible to get the other 50 and all that stuff. And with REST, you can skip any number of records you want and get to another set of numbers. It's relatively easy in REST. So security, we have to limit partners to access only the data that they require. I've already said that before. First, here's all the validation steps I do. So first I have to validate that the call is actually from an authorized partner, right? So we use certificates and tokens, and I won't get into all that, but we're using normal things to identify that a partner is who they say they are. Using a certificate or token, depending on the data they're requesting. Then I validate the client. So any call coming in from our program we generate a token, which is smaller than a cert, and so we validate that it's not only coming from us, but coming from an authorized partner. We have to validate the partner. Actually, the app actually has access to the service. So like I said, they can see in our SDK, they can see all the services we have, and they could go try to use them, but I limit that by when the call comes in. And then validate the client and app. So I validate the app, I validate the app is active, and I validate the app has access to the client data. So I do all these validations essentially every call, unfortunately. We're going to optimize that later, but right now this is what's happening. It's like 4 security checks for every call that's coming in. Luckily, they're really fast. So this is what I'm doing, what I have to do to secure the data. What I decided to use was WCF Message Inspectors. Anybody use those before? No? So they're pretty cool. It's not part of WCF Data Services. It's actually part of WCF. Okay, that you can do this on any WCF service. But I basically intercept a service call before it hits my WCF data service, right? Because I'm really, really big on not duplicating code. So I could have put all this code in every service, right? This validation code. I probably write some common stuff and call that from every single service. But I think I'm up to 16 services now. And I hate duplicating code with a passion. So I didn't want to write the same thing or even call the same thing from 16 different services, right? I wanted one place above that call to do the security checks. And that's what WCF Message Inspectors allow you to have. It's when the message first gets into the service layer, before it gets to WCF Data Services, okay? So I intercept the calls before it hits the service. I have actually different message inspectors for different types of services. We have 3 different types of services so far. One is a general service that uses just a cert. So we have one service that basically tells a partner app what repair shops they have access to. So that is under a different kind of message inspector. It only uses a cert, and that's how they get their list of shops. The one that we use most everybody uses is the client data services uses a token. So either us or the partner has to generate a token based on their cert, and that comes into me, and then I inspect that to make sure that they are who they say they are the app they say they are, and things like that. So we actually use the token for that, because what I need is actually in the token and the cert. And then we use authentication done by calls to the back end. So this is really a different message inspector we use for our program itself. It's separate from the partner stuff, because our program doesn't have to go through so much security to get to the data than everybody else does. So we have a different authentication for that. And I also use this to do my logging. So, because I can do this on a higher level, I know exactly what services they're calling and who they are and what services they're calling. And I also record all their payload sizes. So in the future, when we do charge them based on payload, then it's already in the database now. Plus, I use that same list to look at abuse and see what people are abusing or not. So, summary, challenges. I already said this. Entity Framework definitely works better with properly designed databases. Like in my demos, I use AdventureWorks. It definitely works really good off of AdventureWorks. Currently, even though it's better than version 1, the designers, and this is one of the things I was really complaining about when I was in front of the guy in charge of Entity Framework 4 weeks ago. I was really complaining about the designer. The designer can easily screw up your models, and you basically have to start all over or try to figure out how to fix it in the mapping files. So there definitely are some challenges with the designer. So especially if you're going through lots of changes. Now I'm okay because we're about to release and I haven't really changed the models. But back in early development, I was doing lots of changes and running into lots of issues. So luckily, again, this is a whole nother talk maybe I'll do next year. But there's something really cool coming out any day now from Entity Framework in the new update. If you guys might have heard here, it's called Code First. So you basically skip that whole designer that you saw, and you basically hand code your types, which is good and bad. When you're trying to get something out really quick, it's not that good. But in the long run, it's probably better to use Code First, actually. And that's one of the things on my plate, is to start looking into that and start hopefully changing over our designer stuff over to Code First, especially with a large project like ours. In the end, it's going to be better. But for version 1, getting it out the door, the designer works. You just have some issues. I'll talk about that offline. Okay. WCF Data Services can be limiting. I found that out the hard way too. like anything in Microsoft or maybe programming in general, when anything is easy and there's a lot of auto magic involved, as I call it, you give up a lot of control because of that. Because Microsoft is doing a lot of the work for you on top of, underneath the covers, you don't get access to some of the things that you could have if you wrote this all with just WCF manually. And I looked into how I'm doing REST in WCF, and believe me, it's not easy. And that's why we went this route again to get this out, right? So when you get a lot of auto magic, you give things up. And you just either have to deal with it or work around it, you know, which we are at this point. And then I already showed you that I had to jump through some hoops to get WCF Data Services to expose entities from a separate project. It's just not made to do that. And I had to do those two little things that I told you about to get that to work. And you have to manually edit SVC files to use message inspectors. There's supposed to be some routing thing that would work. I could never get it working. So I have to go in and manually edit every SVC file to tell it which message inspector to use. I'm still going to try to figure that out and try to do that with just WCF routing, so I don't have to manually edit those SVC files. But I haven't got there yet. But so looking forward, allow more write access. Very little of our data right now is write. Most of it's all read-only in this first version, so we have a lot of work ahead of us to create it as a read also. One big thing, I just sat in 2 meetings with our biggest partner this week, with them pounding on us, was this. We knew version 1, we weren't going to have batch processing that allowed people to do like nightly processes, do BI and things like that. We knew that. Unfortunately, our biggest partner using this wants it right now. So unfortunately, our marketing and PM people didn't set their expectations correctly. But anyway, we are working on this to do batch processes. So maybe I'll put that in another talk. Faster data access on the first hit. Really briefly, I know I'm over time. But whenever you do any framework call, the first time it's called, there's a bunch of auto-gen stuff that has to happen. Right? They're called views, actually. Not database views. They're other views. But those are auto-genned the first time that entity is called. You can actually make that faster if you pre-gen the views using command line, which is actually part of my demo project. But we are not doing that yet. So that's one thing I need to start doing. Allowed read-write access per entity. So right now, that's a little more difficult to do, but we're going to set that up. Hopefully, my goal in the end, I have 2 really big main goals for taking as much time as I did to architect this correctly. Go figure. But my 2 main goals is that our main app will be using this API, as I call it, in the future, which we are using a little bit of it. The second one is someday, when we have this object model the way I want it, we're going to right mouse click on it, create those SQL files, and create a whole new freaking database, right? So that's my goal, and those 2 goals are always in the back of my head. Not that they're in anybody else's, but they're in mine, and that's one of my goals. So don't forget Julie's book. I got a copy to give away. Where's the thing? And thank you. All the downloads are there, and on SlideShare you can also rate my talk on SpeakerRate.